Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient, truth telling, and myth busting. And on the program, it's sort of our all things Canada edition. We are going to be tackling Canadian imperialism and pan European imperialism from Iran, Venezuela, Latin America, West Asia, Ukraine, and NATO. And I'm delighted and honored to be joined by two guests. We have coming from Hamilton, Ontario, Ken Stone of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. And coming from Quebec, we welcome back Pierre Jasmin of Artists for Peace, or Artistes pour Paix. And I hope I didn't butcher that with my bad French. uh, Janine Solanki might be joining us, but if not, these are going to be my two guests, and of course, they make up the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. And let's get into it before and actually, well, first off, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program, especially under such a last-minute schedule.
Our pleasure.
Absolutely.
And as always, before we start, a reminder to our audience to please share widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present episodes, our playlists, help us overcome the far-right algorithms and the dominant monopoly Western corporate state media and pseudo-leftist website have in the social media world by sharing our content. Share us across social media and email, and please donate if you can to One Plus One at our PayPal. And if people are having trouble and would prefer an alternative form to donate, then please get in touch with me at youri@gmail. And sometimes Facebook blocks my ability to share One Plus One, so again, please share widely. It helps the show immensely, and it's our only way of overcoming colonial, pro-imperialist, sexist, heteronormative, racist media. So now, on to the topic at hand. So my first question is to Ken, followed by Pierre, is what are your thoughts on one second. Yes. What are your thoughts on what's happening in Iran? We see very massive Iran solidarity protests. And how do you try to convince people that regardless whether you like the Islamic Republic of Iran, economic terrorism, or as the West likes to call sanctions, is not the way to go? And of people of Iran are angry about economic conditions, but that's largely to do with economic terrorism and sabotage. And even if you're a secularist, a feminist, queer liberationist, I mean, personally, I have red flags when it comes to who I align with. And, so the coalition building and so forth that we see, like a lot of the protests that we see from France, to Britain, to the US, and Canada, a lot of these very large and well-funded Iranian solidarity protests that we've been seeing on corporate media and Western state media are people waving pictures of the late Shah and his widow, messages from the Shah's son, who is proudly cozying up, by the way, to genocidaire Benjamin Netanyahu, the mass murderer of Gaza, and he's often cozying up to the Trump administration and any European leader who gives him the time of day. And also to see lots of people waving Israeli flags. I'm sorry. Those are red flags for me. I'm not a fan of the Islamic Republic of Iran, despite some good they do. But I'm not supporting Western imperialism and allying myself with Western-backed neo-monarchists and Iranian Zionists. So, Ken, I'm curious what's your response, followed by Pierre.
I'm just putting into the chat a picture that, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to put a picture in the chat if I can get my thing going here. Dropbox pictures and yeah. Okay, one sec.
If you want to try to share it, we can try to share it if you want.
Just a second.
No problem.
Okay. Do you have the link for our statement, Youri, from the network?
Yes, from the Canada Peace and Wide. Just yeah, that one I have. One moment. Wait, second. Okay. Okay, hold up. Control click. Yes, and I have its. I have the link open. Do you want me to share the screen then?
Well, if you want to take, I just put in the chat a lovely family portrait of
Yes, yes,
the clown prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, the number two, his wife and daughter, along with his charming host in Israel, um, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his charming wife. So I think this picture is worth 1,000 words, and it shows that birds of a feather flock together. Um, so what we can see here is the plan for the recent attempt at regime change in Iran. Uh, from the point of view of Mr. Netanyahu, he would very much like to have seen a regime change. It failed, however, despite his best efforts. And I can go into that too, if you'd like. I'd like to go into the weeds on that, if you'd like. What they
feel free
wanted to
to.
do was overturn the government of Iran and put the Shah's son back on the throne. And as probably many of your readers, your viewers know, his father was the Shah of Iran from 1953 or so till 1979, during which time the Shah of Iran earned the disrespect of the Iranian people because he was a murderous tyrant who sold off the oil revenues of Iran to the British and to the Americans. He jailed thousands of people. He tortured them. I actually was in the torture chambers in Iran. They maintain it as a museum now in Tehran, and
Yes,
I sat in the seats where Ayatollah Khomeini and others were tortured by the Savak, the secret police of the Shah, who were trained by the Americans and by the Israelis. And so the Shah was overthrown in 1979 in a popular uprising that led to the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And ever since then, neither the U.S. or Israel has ever forgiven the Iranian people for overthrowing this guy, who was one of the key pillars of maintaining U.S. hegemony in West Asia. And what they wanted to do in this latest attempt at a regime change is to put his son back on the throne and keep on going. It didn't happen. But I think your question to me was, how do I feel about all this, Dylan? And I'll tell you, I am appalled on so many levels about this latest regime change operation. I'm appalled, first of all, on a human level. On a human level, I look at the world like right now, and I listen to the words of my friend, the great Canadian peace activist Tamara Lorenz. And Tamara says, that humanity is facing at least two existential crises. One is a crisis of the environment. We are in climate chaos now. And the other one is a health crisis that just won't go away. It just won't go away. And, but the governments around the world would prefer to just ignore it. And so all this money, all these resources that should be going into cooperation between the nations of the world to deal with these crises and put humanity in a safe place are instead going to war and regime changes in many countries of the world: Ukraine, Venezuela, Iran, Syria, all these other places. And as a result, here in Canada, people face a homelessness crisis. There is perpetual underfunding of our health and education. There's no money to deal with the environment. But Mr. Carney, our new prime minister, wants to quintuple military spending and send Canadian troops into Ukraine. So from a human level, it's hard to get to get this your brain around the fact that the world is falling apart, and we're instead of cooperating with Russia and China, especially China, who knows how to deal with solar energy, is the world's leader, we are still fighting each other. So that's on the human level. On the level of as an anti-war activist, I'm appalled because the U.S. The U.S. is so cavalier about human life. They just throw people, they throw bodies at these struggles. They don't mind wasting, thousands of lives in an attempt to overthrow the government of Iran and governments in Venezuela and many countries of the world. They violate international law in so doing because the UN Charter very clearly states not only is it illegal to use force against another member state of the UN, it's illegal even to threaten the use of force against another member country. And all that Trump does is he threatens countries around the world, including now Canada and Denmark, over Greenland, and he's cut the funding of the United States to the UN. He's made statements saying that he doesn't see the purpose of the UN anymore. He'd like to replace it with his Board of Peace in Gaza. And, so where it leads to is more and more war and less peace and justice. So as a human rights activist, I'm just appalled. And finally, as a Canadian, I am appalled too, because our Prime Minister and our Canadian governments, plural, both the one that's there now, the Trudeau government before that, and the Harper government before him, and going back to Lester Pearson in 1954, they have always taken a position supporting the U.S. empire in trying to overthrow the governments of Iran. As you probably know very well, Youri, and some of your listeners might be too young to remember, the U.S. and Britain engineered an overthrow in 1953 of the first elected government, I believe, elected prime minister. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh, and he nationalized Iranian oil. Well, that infuriated the British Petroleum and Standard Oil, and they engineered a coup. And according to the documents that my friend and colleague Eve Engler, has published many times, the Canadian government was in favor of that operation. And ever since the overthrow of the Shah in 1979, the Canadian government has been in lockstep with the U.S. government and other Western governments in trying to overthrow the Iranian government again and again and again. And this latest attempt, they tried on December 28th, and the details are very clear, are becoming very clear now. Mr. Bessent, the Treasury Secretary of the USA, had announced about 6 months earlier, and you can watch it on a video in which Jeffrey Sachs, the noted professor from Columbia University, shows how Bessent boasts that in 6 months or so, he's going to collapse the Iranian currency. And it happened on December 28th. The Iranian currency collapsed. And this precipitated protests by Tehran merchants. And that's how the whole issue started in Tehran. Do you want me to go into the details, or do you want to save them for later?
Actually, feel free to go ahead, and then we can get Pierre's.
All right, I'll try and be brief
because all of this is very important, and there are lots of leftists and supposedly anti-war and anti-imperialists who are ignoring these inconvenient truths and these. So go
okay,
ahead.
So I would ask your viewers who are a little bit doubtful to take a look at the statement on our website, the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. We have a statement about the recent the recent regime change operation in Iran, and everything is resourced. Everything is sourced, so people can see. There's lots of hyperlinks, and people can check out the sources themselves. But I'll be brief. So the currency tanked on December 28th. The merchants hit the street. The government at once realized that these people had a legitimate complaint, and they said that we understand, and the bank of the head of the central bank of Iran was obliged to resign, and another appointment was made to replace him. But what happened when there were protests in the street? Suddenly, among the protesters, there appeared armed men, lots of them, and they had Molotov cocktails. They had small arms such as automatic rifles, and they had a lot of gasoline. And they proceeded to set so many buildings on fire. They set, I can't remember, it's all listed in the statement, fire trucks, police stations, libraries, health clinics, government buildings of all kinds, shops. They set a whole market on fire in one city, burned the entire market down. And they started firing on people indiscriminately. Sometimes they fired on protesters. Sometimes they fired on police and security personnel. At least 100 Iranian security personnel were killed. And I'm not sure how many first responders. So the Iranian government made a differentiation saying, we acknowledge the economic protests, but we are going to shut down these people who've come into the street with guns and bombs and are creating havoc in the streets. And they did two things. They called for mass demonstrations, which took place from January 6th to January 12th. And there were millions of people in the street in Iran. The other thing they did was, and with the help of their Russian and Chinese friends, was they were able to jam the Starlink terminals. Now, Starlink is a U.S. military asset. It's not something you can walk into the corner store and buy. It belongs to the U.S. military. And Elon Musk donated 40,000 of these terminals to the regime change operation in Iran. And this was done months in advance. So all this talk about spontaneous demonstrations, etc. There were spontaneous demonstrations, but the people coming out into the street were being guided by these Starlink terminals. They had handlers in Israel. They had handlers in the US. They had handlers in other countries. And they were also armed. You know, the weapons that they had were also smuggled into the country. And some of these protesters themselves, who weren't Iranians, were also smuggled into the country. So the Iranian government, with the help of the Russians and Chinese, were able to jam the Starlink system such that these armed protesters couldn't talk to each other, and they couldn't talk to their handlers overseas. And when I say there were handlers overseas, it's not just me, Ken Stone, saying that. It was Michael Pompeo, the former head of the FBI, CIA, who made a tweet, and it's in the statement as well. The tweet is there; it's referenced, in which he says, "There's Mossad agents beside you on the street. Iranians, go out and protest." Trump also told Iranians to go out and protest and seize buildings and hang on to them because he said help was on the way. And finally, there was on the Farsi edition of the Mossad, that's the Israeli military intelligence or agency, the Mossad, on their Farsi account, it said that we have agents in the streets in Iran. So these people were orchestrating, using the spontaneous demonstrations of the merchants to try and create a regime change. But once the Starlink was shut down, the protests petered out. And so on January 14th, according to my sources, the U.S. and Israel were about to make an attack, but when the protest petered out, they called off the attack. And so now we're in a situation where Trump was whining about the protesters being arrested and killed. Well, there were a lot of innocent people on the streets who were killed. There were, according to the Iranian government, about 2,400 of them were killed, plus about 600 or approximately 700 security personnel and government personnel as well. So about 3,000 people. And Trump was allegedly worried about their security and safety. I don't believe it for a minute. I think he was just using that as an excuse. And of course, his people, the regime change people, were inflating the numbers all the time. So 3,000 suddenly overnight became 36,000. And so Trump was saying, oh, there's a genocide going on in Iran. I have to get involved. And so what happened is he said an armada is coming. And that's where we are today. The armada has arrived offshore of Iran. One aircraft carrier that I know of, a bunch of destroyers. There's been a lot of ground personnel that have been pushed into service from the U.S. bases in the area. And there's a lot of planes in the air, lots of planes in the air. And so right now, Iran and the U.S. are engaged in negotiations. And the next date of negotiations are supposed to be this Friday in Istanbul, Turkey. But the Iranians apparently want to move that to Oman, the country of Oman, which is in the middle, in West Asia. And so we will see what happens now, because, of course, just because they're talking doesn't mean that the U.S. or Israel might not attack, because your viewers might remember back in June 13th, 2025, 6 months ago approximately, while Trump had organized talks with the Iranian government, 2 days before the last meeting, scheduled meeting of the talks, the Israelis staged a sneak attack on Iran, and then the U.S. jumped in behind them like a tag team and bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. So anything can happen. The world is sitting on the edge of its seat, because clearly what will happen, according to the Iranians, is that if the U.S. attacks, no matter how small the attack is, they're going to respond with a comprehensive attack on U.S. naval assets. They are on U.S. bases in the area. They are going to shut the Straits of Hormuz, through which 45% of the world's oil travels every single day, and this will cause prices to spike here. Then they're also saying that they are going to attack Israel if they get attacked. And so we're talking about a regional war. We're sitting at the edge of a regional war, which could happen tonight, could happen tomorrow, could happen on Friday, or could happen after. We don't know, but we do know some things, and that is that this war could easily morph into a world war, because Russia and China are partners with Iran, strategic partners with Iran. They have sent a lot of military equipment to help the Iranians resist an air attack from Israel or the United States. And it could be, I hate to say it, nobody believes it anymore. I grew up with it. It could be the end of humanity if there's World War III. So I'm appalled by the whole situation, Youri, at all levels.
Yeah. Ken, thanks so much for breaking that down. Pierre, well, before I get to my second official question, I'm curious. What's your response on everything that's going on with Iran? But I also want to ask specifically, because Western imperialists, they are very good at weaponizing what I call legitimate grievances. They are very good at weaponizing what I call half-truths. And they've done a very good job doing that, with Iran, where we really do see a split between some of us who, even if we, aren't in favor of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We don't want to see regime change. We don't, not through militarism, and certainly not through economic terrorism. It's up to Iranians who live in Iran, who know their country way better than all of us, who can actually speak the language, who know the culture, how to deal with their problems, and the left there to wage their own revolution, which hopefully includes, queer liberation and feminism, and also the West has been using a lot Iranian filmmakers, Iranian artists, and the broad Iranian diaspora. But most of them, of course, who are very secular, who do speak English very well, and say all the sorts of things that the Western imperialists want them to say so that they can manufacture consent and start this war. So I'm very curious, what's your response, and how would you try to convince people that regime change, economic terrorism on Iran, not the way to go? Very curious your response.
Thank you. I encourage your Belgium French-speaking listeners to go read our site, which is www.artistespourlapaix.org. So they will see, for example, our references to films, very famous Iranian films, like The Separation, which was made in 2011, which described how the population in Iran is divided between different currents. But as my friend Ken said, this is absolutely not a way for us to encourage any military attack against this regime, because it will make things worse, like it's made it worse in Libya, in Syria, in Afghanistan, and so on. And the worst thing also is that you referred to this diplomatic talks in Turkey, but nowadays the diplomatic circle is rotten by influence by United States and NATO. It's not what it was even 4 years ago. And you remember 30 years ago, of course, Bush and Blair attacked the axis of evil, where Iran was in the first place, even before Korea and North Korea and Iraq. And so there was one man who stood against that. And it was Mohammed El-Baradei, who was the director, Egyptian director of the agency of
International
Energy.
Atomic Agency, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. And so he came and said that to the Security Council of UN Security Council, that he found no evidence that Iraq was developing weapons contrary to the CIA and Colin Powell allegations. And that's why this artist pulled up, hearing the UN Swedish inspector Hans Blix, returning from Iraq, could convince with a huge demonstration in the cold of February 2003, Jean Chrétien, the Prime Minister, not to go to war with Great Britain and United States. And it was the first that Canada didn't follow its allies.
Yeah,
and
although secretly Canada did support
afterwards. Yeah, they sent, of course.
Yes, but publicly, but publicly they said, yeah, no.
But at least they made the right decision in the beginning, and Jean Chrétien always boasts about it. So El-Baradei and the agency were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005 for exposing Bush lies, for speaking truth to the powerful, and strengthening nuclear non-proliferation. The problem is now, El-Baradei wrote in his own memoir, The Age of Deception, Nuclear Diplomacy in Treacherous Times, that first he said that Iran probably made preliminary research into nuclear weapons, likely during the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, but that was after the United States and its allies helped Iraq produce chemical weapons that killed up to 100,000 Iranians. So that's what war produced, more aggressivity and so on. And so that the neoconservatives saw this Nobel laureate El-Baradei as an obstacle to their ambitions for regime change around the world. So they waged a covert campaign to find a new, more docile director general when his term expired in 2009. And they find Rafael Grossi if he had demonstrated the same prudence, impartiality, and wisdom as Mohammed El-Baradei, the United States and Israel would not be at war with Iran today. So El-Baradei wrote in a tweet on June 17, relying on force and not negotiations is a sure way to destroy the nuclear non-proliferation regime, however imperfect it may be, and sends a clear message to many countries that their ultimate security is to develop nuclear weapons. Yeah. And he should resign as the director of this agency. And the worst thing, he announced this candidacy for succeeding to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And that would be a catastrophe, of course. So it's all diplomatic change where, because people on the social media, on GAFAM, they say, oh, we must hate our enemies, we must attack our enemies, and they forget about how it would be so much more effective if we gave back the United Nations their role as a referee and being there to say, hey, in Ukraine, if the NATO wasn't there to feed the hate of Zelensky against the Russophone population in Donbass, this war wouldn't have lasted more than 1 month. 1 month after the war in Ukraine started, you remember Karzai, of the former Afghan prime minister, warning Zelensky, don't go into such a situation, negotiate with Putin, and because otherwise they will destroy completely your country, because NATO doesn't care for you. NATO just cares for having more money, and this is the tragic solution, the tragic situation, but in Ukraine where they suffer so much, and all that because Zelensky is posturing and saying, and you know, today the General Secretary of NATO is in Kiev, and furthering his lies as say, we are for you, but please get killed for us.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I believe the head of the United Nations General Assembly is Annalena Baerbock, who was the former Green Party of Germany. She was the foreign secretary of Germany under the coalition government of the SPD. I forgot the other party, but the Green Party was part of that coalition, and this was the coalition government of Germany, which of course basically which supported Israel's mass murder of the people of Gaza and so forth. So very unfit person to have that job. Before we get to But before we get to Ukraine, I'm curious, Pierre, is how do you try to convince people that, again, war and economic terrorism is not the answer with Iran? Because I've noticed when it comes to the propaganda against Iran, when people saw the catastrophe of the Iraq war, and then people started to listen to the voices of reasons that were saying Saddam has nothing to do with Al Qaeda. In fact, he's a secularist who actually eradicates Islamic extremism. You then have with Iran, you had people, including people of the Iranian diaspora. I remember this one British Iranian stand-up comedian who was saying the difference between us and Iraq is we're the ones that actually have weapons of mass destruction, and then because Iran is an Islamic republic, there is just this bizarre there's just a lot of these weird secularists and atheist movements who say, "Oh, that's the country that we definitely should be going to war with, not Iraq." So, and again, and Hollywood has, I mean, there's been like 4 movies within like the last several years in which Iran is the country that we need to, dislike and so forth. So I'm very curious, as an artist, how do you, respond to people who are saying, well, there's all these artists and there's all these, liberal, progressive, lefty movements in Iran that want us to overthrow the government. So I'm curious your response on that.
It's just that this hate propaganda, it's so easy to do and it's so effective that people think that, oh, going to war is an excellent idea, and it's been proven wrong, country after country. You forgot to speak about Syria. How many? It's 1 million deaths there, and it's still not resolved with the Kurdish resistance and so on. So it's so. It's terrible. It's like if people don't consider war as the most evil alternative, and this is impossible when you look at facts. If you look at photographs of the bombed areas, if you look at the poverty of children, and if you look at, of course, the terrible places where and diplomacy, when it's done by somebody whom Ken mentioned, Jeffrey Sachs, fantastic professor from Columbia University, who's doing speeches in Germany, and he's so well respected in Germany and in Russia. Show me one other person who is respected in those both countries who are at war against each other. No, he's trying to build bridges through diplomacy. And I think people should hear all his conferences, because they are so aiming at what should be done. And one of his conferences was in France nearly 2 years ago, when the artist Billie Eilish came to sing to the Paris people, and she was, of course, applauded like she's always applauded. And remember that 2 days ago at Grammy Awards, the great
Billie Eilish and
what she said was, no one is illegal on stolen lands. And in 6 words, she just explained that how people are hating each other and struggling against each other, while forgetting that this continent, America, South, Central, and North, has been invaded by troops, Portuguese, French, English, and so on, and Spanish, of course. This is the evil of, again, war at its worst, and she just was applauded by the whole audience for saying this simple truth. And that in Quebec we respect so much, because we have les artistes pour la paix, we have such good contact with all the First Nations, and that we are struggling together against a government which thinks that Carney, that boasts of having quadrupling the budget, military budget, which is the worst thing to do, because and it makes people suffer more of hunger and of poverty, of cold right now. And what Ken said all this with better eloquence.
Well, let me change subject for a bit because you had already brought up Ukraine. So let me switch my questions for a bit and talk about that, about the tragic ongoing war in Ukraine. So Chrystia Freeland, the former minister of everything, she was the deputy prime minister, she was the economic minister, foreign minister under the Justin Trudeau Liberal government. She's recently stepped down as an MP from Toronto, and she was in England on some academic program in Oxford or Cambridge, and now she will be a paid advisor to the Zelensky government. The war between West and East Ukraine and the Russian war versus Western Ukraine is continuing. Recently, the new Dutch minority government, which is right-leaning, the previous one was a far-right coalition, but this current one, they've announced that the Dutch public will pay a freedom tax to help fund NATO Dutch militarism. That's what they call it, a freedom tax. They've not said how much the Dutch taxpayers will pay for the organized crime racket that is NATO and endless war. And Peter Hitchens, who is not a flaming left-winger, but Peter Hitchens, the columnist, journalist, and best-selling author of the Mail on Sunday, he once said the following on Ukraine. I have never seen a war where there has been so little effort to end it. So I'm curious, Ken, your thoughts on that, followed by Pierre.
Thank you, Youri. I'd be glad to talk about attempts to end the war in Ukraine. But first, let's talk about how it started, just briefly.
Yeah.
In 1991, or maybe it was 1990, the Western countries of NATO met with Gorbachev, the last president of the Soviet Union, and in several meetings, which you can watch and hear at the National Security Archives. And when you get to the National Security Archives of the United States, you type in what Gorbachev heard, and you will get the exact details. And what he heard was that if he would give the okay for West Germany to reunite with East Germany, then NATO solemnly promised, that NATO would not expand even 1 inch eastward toward Russia. And so Gorbachev naively accepted this. And the Warsaw Pact, the military alliance of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, which was formed to counter NATO, dissolved itself. But NATO did not dissolve itself. The Soviet Union dissolved itself. It disappeared. And NATO, once that happened, NATO proceeded to violate what they had told Gorbachev, and they moved approximately 1,200 kilometers east, taking in 14 countries of Eastern Europe. And in 2014, of course, all along the way, the Russian government under Mr. Putin, President Putin, kept complaining about this and saying that there were red lines. And the red lines he specifically spoke about in 2007, I think it was, at a conference in Munich. He said those red lines are going to be Georgia and Ukraine. If you try and take those, he said, there will be war. And so what did the United States do in 2014? They staged a coup in the Maidan in Kiev. They overthrew the elected government of President Yanukovych, and they staged a coup which had the support of the United States under Victoria Nuland, the Deputy Secretary of State for Eastern Europe. Yeah. She said she boasted that the U.S. had spent $5 billion on this coup. Canada spent according to Eve Engler, Canada spent $1 billion. Well, That's a lot of money for Canada. And the ministers of the Canadian government went to the Maidan, such as John Baird, and they supported the coup. And after the coup, the government which took over was riddled with Nazis, which, of course, the Russians were particularly angry about because they had fought a war some 50, 60 years earlier to defeat Nazism in the world, and they suffered 27 million casualties as a result. And that's not an understatement. That's a conservative estimate. So the government in the Ukraine proceeded to delegitimize the Russian language, which created an uprising in the eastern Ukraine, just as if in Canada we suddenly said French is no longer an official language of Canada. There would be an uprising right in the next morning in Quebec and probably other parts of Canada. And so there was an uprising, and then the coup government in Ukraine started a war on the Donbass. And so we've been at a state of war in the Ukraine, not since 2022, but since 2014. And the war continues. But I have to say that the Russian government made several important efforts to try and end the war within a couple of weeks of the SMO, the special military operation. Within a couple of weeks of its commencement, they arranged for meetings in Istanbul, I believe it was, and they even had a tentative agreement with Zelensky. And at that point, the NATO dispatched the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to Kiev, and he told Zelensky not to not to sign the ratified document, but rather to continue with NATO at his back, and they would defeat Russia in no time, and everything would be hunky dory. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case for Ukraine, as Pierre has shown us. For NATO, Ukraine is what Chris Hedges calls a sacrifice zone. The NATO doesn't care what happens to Ukraine, how brutalized, how destroyed, how contaminated it gets with war, and they're intending to fight they're prepared to fight to the very last Ukrainian, and it's getting close to that now. So I think it was a year later, I might have the dates wrong, there was another meeting in Istanbul, and again the Russians tried to get a settlement. The Ukrainians were told by NATO, don't accept the settlement, and so the war has continued to this day. And all I can say is that where we are right now is that the Russian army has completely defeated the Ukrainian forces, even though they have the entire backing of NATO behind them. And the Russian forces have advanced almost to take over the 4 republics of the East in Ukraine. And what Mr. Trump is trying to do is to try and hand off the conflict, because he realizes that the war in Ukraine is lost. He's trying to hand over the conflict to the Europeans and to Canada to continue. And so we have this so-called coalition of the willing. We had that coalition of the willing once before in Iraq, when the Security Council, as Brother Pierre has told us, the Security Council did not give permission to the United States to wage war in Iraq. And so this coalition of the willing decided to abrogate international law and go into Iraq anyway, and they caused havoc there. And only today, this week, I think, the last U.S. troops have officially retreated, been pulled out of Iraq. So that was 2003. So it's been 23 years. 23 years of war. I know that there were millions of refugees from Iraq. They fled. The entire Christian population of Iraq, 2 million people, fled to Syria. And after Syria was attacked, they fled to Europe. There are hardly any Christians left in West Asia and in Palestine
Yeah,
too, with the
yeah,
attacks by the Zionists against the Palestinian people, who are both Muslim and Christian. People forget that in the West. So, according to the Lancet, approximately 1.5 million Iraqis died in that war. In that war, and the war cost the United States several trillion dollars. So that's trillions of dollars that didn't go into infrastructure, health, education, housing, and everything in the United States. And of course, Canada, as you have pointed out, Youri, was in there protecting the coalition of the willing on ships, on planes, and so on, quietly behind the scenes.
yeah.
So, how did
And
I
yet,
get to Iraq?
and yet, well, Ukraine. It seems as if the powers that be are just don't want this war to end. They seem, and it seems and it seems, when the Trump administration says, okay, look, we're done with this, then you have Canada and European countries saying, well, if the US is going to pull out, we're still going to continue. And then they have the nerve to complain about when Trump says, well, if you really do want our weapons and so forth, 5% GDP spending. So it's like they hate. Anyway, so it's just a mess. Pierre, are
It's
you
insane.
and Pierre, are you surprised? Given the catastrophe that was the Afghanistan war, in which nobody really came out a winner. The poor Afghans are the ones that have had to suffer uh, infinitely. Are you surprised that that when it comes to Ukraine, as as Peter Hitchens says, it seems as if nobody wants this war to end. Certainly the West. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, the powers do not want because they build their powers with the money they get from selling weapons and so on and so on. So that's what all the people, the sane people writing for Le Monde Diplomatique, for example, in France, and they are but the only ones because they have a strong base of readers that are paying for their right for receiving information which is not contaminated like what we have from everywhere. You spoke of Cilicia Freeland. You remember that she put Meng Wenzhou in prison for 2 years because Trump asked her to do it. And after that, well, Trump said, no, that was an error. But Canada suffered from this error by destroying links with China. Now, Carney has resumed some links, but then Trump comes back and say, oh, you are buying cars from China, electric cars from China, and it's wrong, and I will give tariffs against Canada, and so it's
so much for the free market.
Yeah, so much for the free market, and so much for friendship between
Yeah,
United
exactly.
States. But it's terrible because you remember. Well, I remember I was 13 at the time. John F. Kennedy saying, "This nation has the will and the faith to make a supreme effort to break the resistance to disarmament and to nuclear non-proliferation, and we shall persevere to the point of victory until the rule of law replaces the always perilous use of force." Okay, we say these were words, but at least they were pronounced. And now, with crazy Trump and Carney, they just favor weapons and use of force, and it's such a miserable outcome.
Well, hold that thought, Ken. Very briefly, before I get to my next question, is any hope that the war in Ukraine is going to end anytime soon, or is this still going to be this World War II Mexican standoff where we just see, people being led to slaughter, namely Ukrainians backed by the West against Russia and against those who are resisting the Nazis that Christian Freeland and the West supported.
We
Okay,
have a
I'll say
bet. We have a bet between Ken and I. Ken is pessimist, and I'm more optimistic. I think.
Okay.
Well, we'll see who wins. But I already lost because I thought that last week would do the job. But go ahead, Ken.
Okay, I have just a few things to say then on Ukraine. One is that, as Pierre pointed out, these are the people who want this war to continue are mainly the leaders and the military industrial complexes of the West. And they make a lot of money from these wars, and their social position depends on the wealth that flows in from their nefarious projects. But the people in Europe and North America, they do not want this war. Poll after poll shows that the majority of U.S. citizens, Canadians even, and Western Europeans are becoming more and more opposed to the war in Ukraine and want to see an end to it. But you would not hear, pardon me?
Even Ukrainians are opposed to the war.
Yes, of course they are. We expected that. So the point here is that we don't hear the views of the ordinary rank and file citizens because they're not covered in the media. When we have demonstrations, and even if we send out media releases, the media doesn't show up. And there have been big demonstrations in Europe, and they're not even, 50, 100,000 people march, and still there's no, reporting of it here in Canada. I don't know about the United States. So we're living in a media atmosphere where only one view is allowed to be heard, and that is the pro-war view. So that's one thing I have to say.
I think the start of this came in September 2017. Minister Chrystia Freeland, Minister of External Affairs, refused to meet Costa Rican Ambassador Ellen White Gomez, and who just had a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons endorsed by 122 UN countries on the 7th of July. I was co-master of a huge ceremony that took place in front of our Ottawa Parliament, where Elizabeth May from the Green Party and Thomas Mulcair of the NDP came to co-sign the treaty. And Canadian Hibakusha Setsuko Turlo was awarded in December alongside ICANN.org the 2017 Nobel Prize, just as Joseph Rodblat of Pogwash had received it in 1995. So this happened, and then today I looked in my ordi, I looked what they say about this ceremony of September 2017. The whole artificial intelligence, the whole Elon Musk supported electronic different, they suppressed it. They suppressed it. And I have photos in my own that about our Artists for Peace, for example, fight with the Oka people in the 2010. And they changed the photo. Like this was a mural. Jean Chrétien came to me and said, this fantastic mural by the Innu people, it's great. The intelligent artificial in my Microsoft UCAM, they changed the photo. They suppressed the margin where you see Innu people protesting and being arrested because they protest against the NATO flights that were already rehearsing their invasion of Serbia because they wanted to impose a separation of different small
They wanted to destroy Yugoslavia. That's what they
Yeah,
wanted to
they
do.
wanted
Well,
to destroy.
it's interesting what you brought up, Pierre. I'll say this, and then I'll go to the next question. But it's interesting what both you and Ken were saying about the huge media blackout. So, uh, when I also turn on the news, the very few times I do turn on corporate media or Western state media, all you're seeing is the Venezuelan diaspora, in the U.S. and other places, celebrating the kidnapping of the kidnapping of their president and wanting Donald Trump to bomb and shoot the place up. And at the moment, like with Iran, the well-funded Iranian diaspora who are waving Israeli flags or waving pictures of the Shah, have the Shah's son speak to them from whatever remote location. There's endless coverage of that, and not coverage particularly of what's happening in Tehran right now, in the Islamic Republic of Iran right now, where there are people saying, no, we don't want the U.S. to invade us. We don't want the U.S., Brits, and Canada, its allies to invade us. And we certainly don't want to be liberated from Israel while it's doing its endless genocide and settler colonialism in Israel. So
Exactly,
and
exactly.
Yep.
and so I think at the moment, I think the anti-imperialist movement, I don't know how we can step our game up. I mean, there's only so much you can do, but we definitely have to go to a lot of, but we definitely have to organize a lot of those definitely need to organize counter protests when we see people, waving flags of NATO, the European Union, the Ukrainian flag, or waving flags of Israel and the old, flag of the, of Iran.
Shaw.
Exactly. But let me ask this question. So changing topic for a bit. Now, I don't know anyone of deep conscience, any true leftists, especially those involved in Latin America solidarity, who isn't thoroughly and deeply disgusted by the U.S. kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Congresswoman First Lady Cilicia Flores, the murdering of 100 or more people, and the injuries, the survivors, and the injuries have been inflicted on them, all under bogus charges that Maduro is a drug lord. And even if there was major drug trafficking happening in Venezuela, the U.S. has no right to do what it does in the region or in any part of the world, violating sovereignty, left, right, and center. Also, and doesn't have the right to also invade countries in the name of fighting terrorism or drug consumption, especially when we know that the U.S. are the biggest financiers of terrorism, drug trafficking, and organized crime on steroids. Now, Ken,
And the greatest consumers of drugs.
exactly. Now, Ken, your organization, the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, was central in trying to free Meng Wenzhou of Huawei when Canada kidnapped her, placed her under extensive house arrest. There was an Iranian connection to that, which you can explain to our audience. But your organization was central in getting her free. Janine's not here, but her newspaper and the organization that both her and Alison Bodine are part of, the Fire This Time movement, they organized numerous online events and in-person events to free Alec Saab, the Venezuelan diplomat who was kidnapped by U.S. authorities thanks to Cape Verde. And we all saw in horror Julian Assange being arbitrarily detained, systematically tortured by multiple governments when he was in Britain fighting off extradition. And yes, despite that, a small group of solidarity campaigns and organizations managed to free him. So, all that being said, do you think, despite the huge power of the imperial states, with enough perseverance and actions, you and like-minded groups and comrades will be able to free President Maduro, Madame Flores? Ken, your response, followed by Pierre.
It's going to be a tough fight to free President Maduro. I have to say that you're giving us more credit on Meng Wenzhou than we actually deserve. We did a lot to embarrass the Canadian government for its stupid role in the kidnapping of Meng Wenzhou, and also the stupidity of removing Huawei from the delivery, the establishment of Canada's 5G internet network. That cost Canadians billions of dollars, and it lost us about 1,400 jobs in a town called Markham, not far from just north of Toronto, where the Huawei had its plant. So actually, it was the Chinese, the government of the People's Republic of China that, on a separate matter, arrested two Canadians, the two so-called Michaels, for espionage in China. And then there was a prisoner exchange in which Meng Wenzhou went back to China and the two Michaels went to Canada. And it turned out everybody said that the Chinese were just doing it to have a prisoner exchange and get Meng Wenzhou back. But hardly had they got back, but the one Michael sued the other Michael because he said that he had misrepresented himself and was using information that the first Michael was getting from North Korea, and he was funneling it into the Five Eyes intelligence network. So one of the Michaels sued the other for being a dupe in an espionage operation. So
I'll also add Michael Korvic also, oddly enough, has been writing articles in, I think, both the Globe and Mail and the National Post, being very hostile towards China. So make what you will of that, of them not being a spy.
Okay.
Well, the fact is that the Canadian government awarded one of the Michael more than $1.5 million for his silence, eventual silence. It didn't work. But it's terrible. It's terrible. Well, we wrote 6 articles, Les Artistes pour la Paix, that were very well distributed in L'Autre Journal, in Entrée Libre, Journal Regard, and so on, and even La Presse Gauche, Presse, so that we could mount a very effective campaign, and even against Chrystia Freeland, of course, what a pathetic figure. And so we succeeded, but finally, and now she's reunited with her family.
So I would say about Mr. Maduro and his wife Cilicia Flores that it's important that the peace movement keep up the agitation about their release all the time. And I even noted that the Russian government, when it was meeting with the Americans over Ukraine, one of the demands that it put into the Americans was free Maduro and Cilicia Flores. So if all countries...
you mean the Russian demand to the U.S.?
That's right. As part of their negotiations on Ukraine, they said, you have to free Maduro. And so I think this is great. And other countries, and there are many other countries who are appalled by the kidnapping of the president of the republic. This is a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of states, a flagrant violation of international law and the UN Charter. Again, I have to say a couple of points, though. One point is that the Russians have now taken the position through their ambassador at the UN that that this was an inside job, that the U.S. had help from certain law enforcement agencies in Venezuela that enabled the U.S. to come in a quick operation, a surgical operation, in which they killed, I think it was 28 or 32 Cuban security personnel who were Maduro's personal bodyguard, and they killed about another 108 people or so. And so it's apparent, according to the UN ambassador of the Russian Federation, those Quislings who sold out their president have taken their money and fled out of Venezuela. So that's an issue that the government of Venezuela is going to have to deal with, because it's a huge breach of their security. But getting back Maduro is something that, the anti-war movement should take up everywhere that we do activities. We do, propaganda, agitation. We need to talk about the returning Maduro and Cilicia Flores. I think it's going to be a tough fight because in the West, there's a long history of abducting leaders of countries of the global South. For
Yeah,
example, Canada, the United States, and France plotted to overthrow Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was the president, the first democratically elected president of Haiti. He was removed in 2004. He was sent into exile in the Central African Republic. The Canadian GTFU or some the commandos of the
Yeah.
Canadian government secured the airport while the Americans seized Aristide and put him on a plane for the Central African Republic, and the Mr. Aristide suffered an exile of 7 years. But that wasn't as bad as Patrice Lumumba,
yeah,
who was the former head of the first head of the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Yeah.
And I think it was 1961. Do I have the year right? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But in any case, there was a Canadian peacekeeping mission that went there. And the Canadian peacekeeping mission collaborated with the enemies of Mr. Lumumba, and they turned him into his enemies, who executed him, and then put his body into a vat of acid, so there would be nothing left of it. And this is the way that that Western governments deal with leaders of revolutionary countries around the world, and we should make this a top priority, getting Maduro and Cilicia Flores back.
All
yeah.
right. And
I think
yeah, Pierre.
I think it will be helped by the movement right now against ICE in America. That's now present in United States are not so well seen by the population, especially not in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and so that eventually this movement, which is gathering a lot of strength by having now some democratic members of the party who are waking up from their sleep and sort of having been awakened, yeah, by, for example, AOC and people, Ilhan Omar was arrested. Did you see the video of Ilhan Omar being they threw some vinegar at her?
Yes.
And how she reacted. She didn't flee from the attack. She went to the attacker. And she has so much energy and she's so strong. And this is the kind of people that we must support because they are going to make this fight a victorious fight. And so, well, that's my hope. And again, Ken might say that I'm too hopeful, but
well,
it hasn't. I get my emotion gets me to be
no
more
problem,
hopeful.
no problem. But yes, one can one can only hope, but definitely the anti-war movement because something I wanted to add to what Ken was just saying is is when the West overthrows these governments, it could be a democracy like Haiti under Aristide, or it could be a country that has some autocracy like the Syrian Arab Republic, or it could be a country which is not perfect, but it's just trying to do its best. The West, when it comes to the overthrow, the demonization of that political leader and the movement, often vastly the popular movement behind him often gets very demonized. So
Yeah.
I do hope that with the huge ICE protests that's happening in the U.S., that people also see that Western imperialism is explicitly linked to it, because I think because there are some people in the U.S. who, even though they know about how awful the U.S. has been to Latin America, they still will recycle propaganda like we should overthrow the Cuban government, we should overthrow the Ortega government of Nicaragua, and some even supporting the kidnapping of Maduro. So.
Yeah, you have in Belgium a great movement which you call the Agora of the Inhabitants of the Earth, led by Ricardo Petrella. And what the job they're doing to inform people about how, for example, the water right now is getting scarcer and scarcer in the whole world, and this is going to be a problem that we'll all have to deal with, and we'll have to go back to United Nations for solutions on that. And so that all these struggles are, I think, getting now the right direction. They're not so naive anymore to believe that the United States will save them. And that on the contrary, the United States is the biggest imperialist power, and we must fight them.
And with militarism, also the biggest climate offender.
Yeah, of course.
My last question is this: we see my last question is this. So we see Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza and the reign of terror that Palestinians experience with settler colonial violence in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Lebanon, particularly southern Lebanon, is still being harassed by Israel. And in Latin America, not just Venezuela, but we see the far right continuing to rise and rise. And not only has Venezuela seen their democratically elected president kidnapped, but in Peru, Pedro Castillo is still in prison. In Pakistan, Imran Khan is also jailed, and some people are worried about his condition, whether he's even still alive, as the Western-backed military junta continues suppressing people power movements there. Both of you, I'm really glad both of you mentioned Syria. The Western-backed ISIS al-Jilani government is persecuting Syrian Christians, Syrian Kurds, Syrian Shia communities, notably the Alawites, but also all Shias and Sunnis who don't subscribe to the cult of ISIS and who protect their fellow Syrians. So these are very troubled times, and they seem, and these times also seem endlessly bleak. What message, though, do you want to share with people who might be feeling discouraged or simply overwhelmed? Ken, your response followed by Pierre. And if there's anything in the statement of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network that you want to share with folks when it comes to Iran, please feel free to share.
Okay, I'll let me start, please, and then Pierre can jump in. I would like to say, first of all, that we don't have a choice. The future of humanity is in our hands. And Pierre just talked about the water problem that was being brought up, and the scarcity of water is on the horizon. It's already here, but these kinds of problems cannot be solved when humanity is fighting itself, when we're fighting each other in all these wars and regime change operations. And this is the need for, as Tamara Lorenz says, for cooperation between all the countries of the world. Peace and cooperation are the solution to these problems. This is not something that's esoteric that you have to get an MA or a PhD to understand. It's simple. If we, the people of the world, take into our hands the idea that we should have peace with our fellow human beings and cooperate on ending these huge crises that are facing us, we can do it. But on the other side, we have the forces that promote wars and militarism and support the wars and the genocide. And you were mentioning about the repression that in Latin America. We also have that repression here in Canada. There's a new book out from Baraka Books. We had a book launch here in Hamilton called Raising Palestine. Baraka Books is in Montreal, and the book was about the repression of Canadian solidarity activists with Palestine here in Canada. People who've lost their jobs, people who've been disciplined, people who didn't get jobs, and people who've been kicked out of institutions. All kinds of laws that are being promulgated to limit our rights to speak in certain places and times and locations. All these things are happening. The latest one of which was that my old friend and colleague Eve Engler was convicted, I think it was last week,
Yeah.
of organizing an email campaign. An email campaign. Can you believe it? He was convicted of harassing an officer of the Montreal Police Service for arresting him
Yeah.
for complaining about a notorious genocide supporter named Dahlia Kurtz in Montreal. I think she's in Montreal, and so Crown dropped the case against Eve Engler of harassing Dahlia Kurtz, but they convicted him of organizing an email petition against an officer of the Montreal police force. And this is completely outrageous and against our rights to freedom of expression. Where is this going to end? People who want to sit back and hope it all goes away, it's not going to go away. It's getting worse. And people have to take a stand. You have to get involved in an organization that's standing up for Palestine or standing for peace in Ukraine or standing against regime change in Iran or Venezuela. And there are many such groups in the country. In fact, we have more than 55 such groups inside our Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. And I encourage people to go to our website and read more about it. So I would say that the time is now for people to get involved. The worst thing that you can do to yourself is isolate yourself at home. You're only going to get depressed and you aren't going to be able to do anything. You'll get sick. But if you join the movement and you join in the resistance, your health will improve and the political climate will improve. And you might be able to, with us, over time, reverse the trend towards war and militarism, of which we have in Canada. The person pushing it the most is none other than Mr. Carney himself in Ottawa, who is going to quintuple the military budget and try and put Canadian troops into Ukraine. So I'll just finish on Ukraine, if I may. I think the war in Ukraine will end, but it won't end with any kind of deal cooked up by this coalition of the willing or Mr. Trump. I'm afraid that, like as in Afghanistan, the war makers cannot see a reason to stop making war. It's so profitable and makes them so powerful that they can't see an end to it. And in Afghanistan, where Canada had an occupation for 13 years in the province of Kandahar and other parts of the country, the military was asked many times, what are you trying to achieve here? And the fact was, they couldn't tell us what they were trying to achieve. And after 20 years, they lost. They had to leave the country. So they spent trillions of dollars. They killed hundreds of thousands of people, including 158 Canadians who died, soldiers who died there for nothing, and spent $25 billion of Canadian taxpayers' money, which increases every single year, and accomplished nothing. The Russians will probably finish this war when they decide just how much of Ukraine they are going to take for their own security interests. They want to make sure that wherever they park their tanks, they want to make sure that the war will not start again from the West by NATO a year or two down the road. So Mr. Putin has not called me up and shared any information with me lately. So I don't know where they're going to park their tanks. But eventually they are going to park their tanks somewhere. And that's where the new border is going to be. I don't know if there'll be a part of Ukraine left or not. I have no idea. The war will come to an end when the Russians have pushed the NATO forces out of the way and they decided this is where we're going to make the border. And I want to say that our mutual friend, Pierre, Madame Chrystia Freeland, is working now as a paid assistant to Mr.
Yeah, I
Zelensky
was going to give
in
another
Kiev.
bad advice.
And people have to remember where she came from. Canadians have to remember that it was her grandfather was the number 4 Nazi in Poland during World War II. He was a Ukrainian who was appointed by the occupying Nazi powers in occupied Russia during the war. As he was given a newspaper that was taken away from a Jewish family in Krakow, and he was given the apartment of the Jewish family, and the Jewish family was sent to Auschwitz where they perished. And her grandfather put out Nazi propaganda. He was number 4 in line to Hitler in Poland. After the war, he fled to various places and ended up in Canada. And they set up a library for him in Alberta, where all his newspapers, which he brought with him from Poland, his Nazi newspapers, and they created an archive at the University of Alberta. I'm not sure which campus. And so she, growing up, she said that everything she learned about politics was the good thing she learned about politics was from her grandfather, and that this one who was in Poland, and she refuses ever to say that he was a Nazi. She says he was just a freedom fighter, a freedom fighter. He was a freedom fighter, just like Mr. Hunka, who went to the brought by Trudeau to the Canadian Parliament, a member of the Waffen SS who operated in Ukraine, and the Canadian MPs all got up like trained seals, and they gave him applause, standing ovations. This is the level of stupidity of our government and the MPs whom we have elected. Every year they tell us on November 11th, lest we forget, and they completely forgot. So I will just say that part of the reason this war is continuing is because there's a political element in Ukraine. These are Banderite Nazis. These are the ones like Hunka, who came to the Canadian Parliament, and Chrystia Freeland is part of this. And she is promoting this government because now this government is basically run by 2 Nazi parties in Ukraine, and they are not going to stop fighting until the Russians push them out, which I hope will be very soon.
Yeah, any a tough act to follow, I would say, but
Yeah,
any
especially
final,
the beginning
any
when he
final
said
things,
so many
things
positive things. Well, I'll end with some just culture hints.
Okay.
Go listen to the 13th Symphony by Shostakovich, which is called Babi Yar, which was the horrible place where the worst anti-Semite event happened, right besides Kiev, by the Nazi there. But Yevtushenko, who is Ukrainian, worked with Shostakovich with his poem, and this symphony it's called with a lot of choirs and it's so moving because you remember, and because of this symphony they built a souvenir of Babi Yar with a great Jewish monument. But the problem is the road that's leading to this monument is named after a Nazi commander, and so that's something. But go hear this symphony; it's so moving and everything. And read this. I don't think it will. It's called Francesca Albanese. When the World Sleeps. It will be finally edited in English in April. It's been in French for 5 months, and she's the representative of Palestinian United Nations rapporteur, and it's such a moving book, and she's such a wonderful human being, and we must not think that we must all deal we must settle all problems with political opinions. I think we must allow poets and musicians and singers and all these people like Billie Eilish I was referring to before to open up our world to love and sort of sharing in the true way and not.
She could be VP. I say we nominate Roger Waters, formerly of Pink Floyd.
Okay.
And I think also in closing, Pierre, you were saying many times, and I was asking you, well, what do you say to our secular leftist friends who think that this time around the West has good intentions in Iran, and you were just saying remind them about Iraq, remind them about Afghanistan. Ken, you were talking about all of the wars we've been having the last 20 plus years. I think we just have to remind people, have you seen what Western imperialists do? And I think we've won that argument there. We just have to, continue to mobilize, and mobilize.
Well, you summed it up perfectly, Youri. So I thank you for that.
Well, we were joined on this edition. Yeah, Ken, you want to say one more thing?
I would like to say one more thing in closing, and that is I encourage people to go to our website, read the statement on Iran, and please be advised that if the peace talks that are supposed to take place in Istanbul or Oman in the next couple of days don't go anywhere and we end up in a war, another U.S. war of regime change against Iran this time, we are planning as a network to call on our member groups across the country, just as we did when they kidnapped Maduro, and we had 13 cities involved in demonstrations. We're going to try again to do the same thing and demand of the Canadian government, demand of Mr. Carney, that he distance himself from this U.S. invasion and condemn it as a violation of international law. We also have 5 other demands, which people can read in the statement, but please be advised that if you do not like war, you can come out on the streets in the event of an attack on Iran and make your voice heard, send a message to the Prime Minister. Thank you.
I'll definitely make sure to link to that. Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our All Things Canada edition and anti-imperialism episode with Ken Stone of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War and Pierre Jasmin of Artists for Peace. And they are both members of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. My apologies to the audience that we couldn't get Janine Solanki of Fire This Time newspaper, a member of Mobilization Against War and Occupation. Hopefully we'll be able to have her back on and have this panel back on. Until then, though, my many thanks to you all for coming, especially on such short notice. Keep up the great work you do. Power to the people, death to Western imperialism. And folks, don't forget to share widely all of 1+1's content, share widely past and present, recent new episodes, and our playlist. Donate, please, if you can. And remember, Facebook sometimes blocks my ability to share, so please share it widely. All my best until then. Good night and good luck, and we are out.